when we talk about Primarchs who are going to come back, the most common name you hear, I think, is probably Leman Russ. And this is a pretty smart guess. So if you're not familiar, Warhammer has a whole miniature war game that goes alongside it. And the Space Wolves are one of the most popular factions in the game. The Space Wolves, Blood Angels and Dark Angels and Black Templars, they get a lot more attention than other chapters. And as we've had the Primaris range released, we've had to see all of these ranges be updated. And the Space Wolf range is yet to be updated. So when it comes to the next Primarch to come back, given that we've had the Lion, and for obvious reasons, we can't have Sanguinius, a lot of people think it's probably going to be Leman Russ. And that would make a lot of sense also, because given that we have the Lion, arguably Leman Russ affords a huge narrative opportunity that none of the other Primarchs can really offer right now. We can have the Lion and the Wolf storyline kind of kick off once again. This is a legacy storyline from Warhammer 40K, one of the most popular in the entire setting. And it would be really cool to see that kind of come back through. We can have a more mature Lion and Leman Russ and kind of follow that storyline. And I think that would be very popular with the fans. So given that the narrative opportunity is there, and given that the Space Wolf range is going to be updated anyway at some point, suggesting Leman Russ as the next Primarch to return makes a lot of sense. However, there are some things in the lore that I think suggest that actually I don't think Leman Russ is going to come back for a while, and I actually think Leman Russ is going to be the last Primarch to come back. So in Battle of the Fang, we have this conversation between two members of the Thousand Sons, and they're talking about their Space Wolves, and one of them says, "Do I detect admiration, brother? If so, it is misplaced. They were made to do the dirty work no other legion would do. They are the exterminators, the vermin control of the Imperium. They cannot change, they cannot improve. Just like us, they are imprisoned in the image of their Primarch. Do not fear, he cannot come to their aid now, as you well know." So the Thousand Sons are actually convinced that somehow they have Leman Russ trapped somewhere. And I imagine they have no intention of ever letting him go. Additionally, if we have a look in another Space Wolves book called Ashes of Prospero, there is a suggestion that multiple Primarchs are going to come back in the near future after Guilliman. And the Lion is listed, and multiple other Primarchs are listed. However, it is said specifically that Leman Russ is not on that list. They can't see the return of Leman Russ, and they don't think he's going to come back for a while. And the final piece of evidence I would suggest as to why we won't see Leman Russ in the near future is because we have just had a book called Wolf Time released. Now, this book called Wolf Time is about the Wolf Time. It is not the Wolf Time. However, the Wolf Time is the name of the period whereby Leman Russ will return. So it would be very odd of Games Workshop to release a book called Wolf Time, not have the Wolf Time, and then a couple of years later also have the Wolf Time. Do you see what I'm getting at? This is a bit weird. And so I actually don't see Leman Russ coming back for a while, as much as it would make sense kind of logically and practically in terms of the Space Wolf range, and also of course having that kind of, you know, narrative build up with the Lion, which, you know, as a big Dark Angels fan would of course be absolutely fascinating, and I would kill to see that dialogue. But I don't actually think we're going to see Leman for a long time. Now, in terms of our other options, well, I think there's a pretty good case to be made for Vulcan, the Primarch of the Salamanders. And the reason I think there's a good chance we'll see Vulcan in the near future is because we kind of need him pretty badly right about now. So if you're not familiar, the Golden Throne is failing, and in the book Dark City, we actually see that the Golden Throne has about 200 years left, and that's at the point of Guilliman's kind of return to Terra. It's just around that time. And so, and we've moved on from that. We really don't have much time left. And so we really need Vulcan back, because he is the last true artisan amongst the Emperor's loyalist sons, and probably the only person left who can actually fix the Golden Throne, or at least delay its destruction, because the Mechanicum, it seems to be beyond them. And what Belisarius Cawl has a bunch of other stuff going on right now, so I don't think he's going to get involved. And there's a lot of politics within the Mechanicus, sorry. However, that is where I get to the meat and potatoes of today. Because if you think Vulcan would be the next Primarch to return, I think you have to go for Jaghatai Khan to be the next Primarch to return. And to clarify, I don't get leaks, I don't get rumors sent to me or anything like this. This is purely just based off of the things I have read and like things I'm kind of putting together. But I think Jaghatai Khan, the Primarch of the White Scars, is going to be the next Primarch to return. The reason I think this is because as bad as humanity is kind of doing right now, and as bad as it will be if the Golden Throne fails for us, the Drukhari are actually doing far, far worse. So one of the things we also find out in Dark City is that the Drukhari are doing terribly roundabout now. The Drukhari live in Commorragh, which is based in the Webway. And one of the main reasons to live in Commorragh in the Webway is because you're kind of protected from a lot of the ongoings within the Imperium or within the galaxy. And so they can kind of raid at will. The galaxy is their oyster. They are parasites fundamentally. However, living in the Webway did not protect them from the Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift. The easiest way to think about the Webway is it's kind of like tunnels that go through the warp. And so those barriers protecting it from the warp are failing, and so demons are pouring into the Dark City of Commorragh. So we really don't have long left before Commorragh utterly fails. And as things currently stand, where we last saw the lore, the Drukhari basically have no plan to fix this. They're kind of done for. What that means, therefore, is that the Drukhari will either die, or Games Workshop will need to give them a big narrative focus in the near future, which is what I think we will see. Now, this makes a lot of sense when we add in a couple of other things. So, again, just as we talked about with the Space Fools, the Drukhari kind of need a bit of a concentration roundabout now, because their model range is actually quite outdated for a lot of things. And so I think we'll see them become the bad guys of the next edition. So each edition of the game, there is a new kind of bad guy. So this edition is Tyranids, the previous edition it was Necrons, before that it was Death Guard, and each time you're the bad guy, you kind of get a bit more narrative focus, you get more models, etc. And the Drukhari have been the bad guy once before, and I think we'll see that again. And I think that will afford Games Workshop to put this narrative focus onto the Drukhari. We'll get this storyline around how to fix Commorragh, how to stop it failing. And from that, we will then move into a storyline that will be the Emperor's Children, or the forces of Slaanesh, versus the Drukhari. Because as demons are pouring into Commorragh, the main demons who are going to be interested in this are going to be the servants of Slaanesh. And one servant of Slaanesh that I think we're very likely to see is Fulgrim, because Fulgrim is the demon Primarch of Slaanesh, and Fulgrim is a big hole in the Warhammer 40K range right now. All of the solo god demon Primarchs have got models except for Fulgrim, and so we're all expecting to see Emperor's Children in the kind of very near future, realistically, coming years. And so if you have the Drukhari, and then you have the Emperor's Children and Fulgrim, well, what do you know? Jaghatai Khan, last seen going into the Webway, it all makes sense. And do you want to know that the real sweetener here, okay, is that the thing about Jaghatai Khan that's quite interesting is he and Fulgrim are opposites. So, and I mean that in a true sense. So Magnus the Red and the Emperor as well has hinted at this. They suggest that Jaghatai and Fulgrim were supposed to land on opposite worlds. However, someone intervened, some warp entity intervened and swapped the worlds that they landed on. And therefore, history was changed. And as cool as it would be to have Fulgrim fight Guilliman, because he's already killed him once, and have Fulgrim fight the Lion, because they're both amazing swordsmen, having Fulgrim fight the Khan would probably be the coolest thing, in my opinion, because they are opposite Primarchs. And I think something that we're pretty likely to see. The other thing that I will say, and this is the main thing we're going to talk about today, is that we have far more suggestions in the lore about Jaghatai Khan returning than I think for any other Primarch. So I mentioned Ashes of Prosper, right, where it said that Leman Russ, he's not even on the list to come back. The first Primarch on the list was Lionel Johnson. The second was Jaghatai Khan. When we did the video on Rogel Dawn, for example, and we talked about how the lore around Rogel Dawn in the Scouring is heavily concentrated in this idea of the Iron Cage, it kind of defines the character. However, that lore is very old. It hasn't been written again for a very long time in full. When we look at the disappearance of Vulcan, of course, looking at the Beast Arises series, where there's a lot of inconsistencies. The lore around Jaghatai Khan was rewritten for the White Scar supplement, and it was put again in quite some detail in the first Founding book. And Games Workshop has seemingly got the lore around Jaghatai Khan's disappearance down, which they haven't got for any other Primarch. And additionally, out of all of the sons, whilst Vulcan's sons, there are suggestions that they are finding more relic. The Salamanders need to find a bunch of relics in order to get Vulcan back. But they've still got quite a way to go in order to find all their relics to find Vulcan. Whereas when it comes to the White Scars, we've actually got the last hunt of the White Scars heading off to go and find Jaghatai Khan. That's already underway. And we already have artwork from Games Workshop about White Scars in the webway. So when I look at all of these things, I think more than anyone else, I think we've got the lore mostly there for Jaghatai Khan's disappearance. Here you can see the White Scars actually in the webway fighting against the Drukhari. It looks like they're having a bit of a bad time here, I'll be honest. But at the same time, they are more than capable of dealing with these members of the Cabal. Now, what's really cool about this is that we actually get to see the White Scars enter the webway to go on this last hunt. And I'm going to play for you now a passage that comes from a book called The Last Hunt. As you can guess from the name of the book, the ending of the book is that they are going into the webway to go and find their Primarch, to find the Kargan.
You all know me. You know how I cleave to the memory of our great Kargan. How I have sought to emulate him and honor his memory since the first day I was taken from the steppes to the mighty Quan Zhao. We all know his story, and we know where he rides still, beyond the ken of man. There, beyond the veil of reality, our Primarch hunts. There, we will find vengeance for our brothers fallen on this same plane all those years ago. I will personally take the head of the Xenos filth who slew the great Arashan Khan. And, if we are found worthy, I will lay it at the feet of the Kargan. We shall find him, and in doing so, we will atone for what has happened here. We ride from reality into the unknowable beyond. We shall not return, not in this life. Our fleet will carry the word of what happened here back to Chagoris. All will know of the Tulwar Brotherhood. All will know of our last hunt.
Dun dun dun. Damn, that was a cool scene. So, Jaghatai Khan or Jaghatai Khan, I actually don't know how it's supposed to be pronounced. I'm going to go with Jaghatai because sometimes I feel like I should just buy the audiobook just to find out how they pronounce things. But I say Jaghatai, so I'm going to say Jaghatai, but it just sounds kind of odd. Anyway, he's an absolute bad man in the book. Really like this character. So this actually takes place shortly after a rather disastrous campaign against the Tyranids. And so that's what he's talking there about, kind of, regaining their honor in this respect, because it's not gone well for them recently. And I will say in a few campaigns, the White Scars have had quite a tough time of it. They've actually not done so well in recent campaigns in Warhammer 40K. And in Last Hunt, we get a huge insight into the culture of White Scars. It's one of the things about the book that I think makes it so good. And the insight into how they view their Primarch and his return was quite shocking to me. The Stormseers of the White Scars, which is the names for their librarians, they're always kind of searching for Jaghatai Khan in the webway, and you're sending out feelers trying to find him. And they've never got lucky. And there are a couple of thoughts that the White Scars themselves have about their Primarch. Some of them think he might have already returned. Some White Scars, are looking at Guilliman coming back, and they're like, what if our Primarch has already come home? So there's one part in the book where the Space Marines actually feel like someone's watching over them, like someone's guiding them, and it feels like what they think their Primarch would feel like. So there's that. But another instance that we see, and this is a more shameful view from the White Scars, and getting onto why Jaghatai Khan disappeared, there is a big fear amongst the White Scars that the Khan left deliberately. And the Khan, you might call it abandoning the Imperium, you might call it leaving his sons. However you want to call it, fundamentally, he has left the Imperium and hasn't been seen for 10,000 years. And that's a big fear that they have. Now, it's something that's not widely shared, because to share that fear is to invite, interrogation or dismay from your brothers, but also you might get bonked on the head by a chaplain. But also, we find out in The End and the Death Volume 1 that this fear seems to have some backing to it. And we actually find this out from Malkador. So I'm going to play another passage for you now, and you'll see how these things are starting to tie together.
The Warhawk is dead. By any mortal standard. Because he fell so close by, just beyond the walls, his body was carried in at once and placed on this catafalque in a balming field of cataplesian stasis and life suspense. If he had died further out or on another world, there would be no hope at all. But there is. For now, and not much longer, an iota of necromimesis remains. The tattered banner of Jaghatai's soul, gusting into the warp, is still attached to his corpse by a single thread. I have determined this, and I have been trying repeatedly in these last few hours to draw it back. Every shred of healing science has been exhausted, for it is a matter quite beyond Medicae law. I have been ministering my anagogic craft to keep that thread attached. It is slow salvation. Every time I try, the attempt ends in failure, and I am forced to ease away. The Khan's soul will not survive a prolonged effort on my part. It frustrates and saddens me. It should be possible. I don't know why I can't save him. Perhaps even my will and warpcraft are not sufficient. Perhaps it is hubristic of me to presume I can act like a god and claim the power or right to bring a man back from death. Perhaps Jaghatai is tired of the world and yearns to leave it. But I will try, and I will keep trying. If my lord's attention was not occupied elsewhere, it's what he would be doing. It's what he'd want me to do. He would not see another son die. I bend my mind in again and resume the subtle psychosurgery to keep Jaghatai's soul secure. And this time, I am granted one merciful miracle. Anabiosis. It is demanding, even for me, but I gather the tattered, dancing shreds of Jaghatai's soul, and I draw them back in, folding them tenderly into the casket of his body. I exhale. The Warhawk will live. It will be days, weeks, perhaps months before his corporeal body heals and he awakens. But he will live, if any world remains to live upon. Then, at the very last, as I look down at what I have done, I realize I haven't done it at all. I couldn't. Such a feat was beyond me. It was shameful arrogance to believe I could do any such thing. I have not done this. Someone else has. Someone else has reached in past me and performed the deed, like the god he is not, but appears to be.
Like the god he is not, but appears to be. I love that line from Malkador, and I love this really touching moment from the Emperor. So if you're not familiar, that's the first thing the Emperor does when he comes kind of back into the throne room from spending all his time fighting Horus in the warp. And up until this point in the novel, Malcador's actually been trying to contact the Emperor and get him to come back because they're about to undertake the assault on the Vengeful Spirit. Now, that scene is really interesting for me because as soon as I read that line from Malcador about how perhaps Jaghatai yearns to leave the world, it really made me think about the White Scars lore around Jaghatai's disappearance, because I remember reading this theory. It's in quite a few White Scars books that talk about how White Scars do fear that their Primarch kind of abandoned them. And it really made me think, because clearly Malcador already thinks that Jaghatai wants to give up in some way, or he thinks that's a possibility at the very least. And Malcador probably knows Jaghatai better than anyone, because Malcador's as close a thing to a parent that the Primarchs ever really had. It's quite interesting to hear that there are multiple versions suggesting that Jaghatai might have just kind of given up on the Imperium, and that fits his character very well. So if you're not familiar, the Emperor and Malcador never thought, or they were never certain, that Jaghatai would stay loyal. There was this suggestion in the lore that Jaghatai might have taken Fulgrim's place. And does that mean he would have become a traitor? In the book Scars, we actually find out that some of the White Scars did side with Horus. And that's what we actually see in this artwork here, where there's kind of a small White Scar civil war. It's not as kind of cataclysmic as what the Dark Angels suffer later on, but there are traitorous White Scars like in the Heresy. There are traitorous of multiple legions, but the White Scars get quite a bit more focus in this regard than other legions. And when it comes to the Primarchs viewing Jaghatai Khan, nobody really knows him. That's the kind of the thing that comes up consistently, this idea that outside of already Horus, because Horus and Jaghatai have kind of like a bit of a respect, most of the Primarchs don't really trust the Khan, and they don't really know if they can beat him. Even Sanguinius, and people like to typically say Sanguinius is the best fighter, even he's like, look, we don't know how good the Khan is, because the Khan always kind of holds it back. He always keeps his cards close to his chest. So Jaghatai may have actually given up on the Imperium, or at the very least, what he's done is kind of gone on a very long hunt. And that is what I think most people think of when they think of Jaghatai Khan going into the Webway. Now, there is no evidence so far around the idea that Jaghatai Khan was captured by the Drukhari. I will say in Lelith Hesperax's book, there is a nod to a very large human who beats loads and loads of other gladiators, and this often gets cited, but I will say she later beats him, so I'm pretty certain that's not Jaghatai. And there's no evidence at all that we have suggesting that Jaghatai is in Commorragh. There's no suggestions that he's being experimented on. But it is a possibility. The Drukhari probably wouldn't be bragging about this. Now, I think what is most likely is this idea that Jaghatai is kind of crusading throughout the Webway. And I think one of the things you have to bear in mind here is that the Webway is huge and we don't know a lot about it even to this day. So it's not just got loads of tunnels and Commorragh. In theory, there are all manner of monsters and horrific things in there. Perhaps Jaghatai could do something like go and attempt to clear the area around the Webway Gate on Terra. Perhaps Jaghatai could be clearing out sections of the Webway, working even with the Harlequins or with Craftworld Eldar forces. There are a lot of possibilities here of things that Jaghatai could be doing. So let's just take a look actually at the passage where Jaghatai Khan disappears. Now, I will say this is not the latest version of it because it was rewritten in the first founding books. However, this is from the 8th edition White Scar supplement, the last supplement they had, and it's probably the most in-depth version that we have on Jaghatai Khan's disappearance. Now, I'm only going to play for you the last bit, but I think it kind of highlights quite a lot how deliberate Jaghatai Khan was in his actions of following the Archon through the Webway Gate.
The Archon stood before the portal itself, directing his warriors with flicks of his sword. He was laughing, savouring every ounce of pain being inflicted, The smile did not leave his face even as he observed the Kargan racing towards him. Without any loss of composure, he simply directed more of his forces in Jaghatai's direction. The Great Khan could not be halted. He pushed onwards, his first brotherhood at his side, cutting down foe after foe with his sword. It is said that with his forces failing, the Archon moved to flee into the portal. It cannot be known whether or not the Xenos desired to close it before Jaghatai Khan raced through with the entirety of his brotherhood. All that can be known is that as soon as the last White Scar crossed the threshold, the shimmering gateway collapsed. The battle raged on for hours after, the remaining White Scars slaughtering without mercy those Drukhari abandoned by their lord. For days they scoured the battlefield, for weeks the rest of the system. The Stormseers searched the warp for any clue to the Great Khan's whereabouts, but none was found. It has been said by some of the White Scars that perhaps pursuit was not Jaghatai's only goal in following the Drukhari overlord into whatever lay beyond the portal. That perhaps the Great Kargan saw an opportunity for freedom without limit and an endless plane to explore and make war in. Those few who express this view can find themselves shunned by their brothers, but the seed of doubt is now long planted. Only the Khan of Khans knows the truth, and the White Scars continue to live in the belief that he will someday return to take his rightful place at their head.
So Jaghatai Khan actually led the White Scars for 70 years after the Horus Heresy, and when he gets back to Chagoris, he actually finds out that the entire system is in disarray, and there are Drukhari especially who are raiding his homeworld, and they've taken huge numbers of slaves. And so Jaghatai is obviously outraged by this, and so he leads his sons in a campaign against the Drukhari. He's very successful, and in fact, Jaghatai seems to have a great understanding of the Drukhari. He can kind of track their movements where others wouldn't, because of course the Drukhari, being incredibly quick, is normally what makes them kind of so formidable an opponent, and very hard to track. But only a mind as brilliant as a Primarch can do so. And the final battle happens on a planet called Kurisil 5, and on that planet, Jaghatai actually leads his sons, at least the first brotherhood of his sons, through the Webway Gate, chasing the Archon who had been commanding the Drukhari. And up until this point, the Archon's kind of mocking Jaghatai, he's kind of come at him, and eventually he just walks through the Webway. It suggests that the Archon is hoping to entrap Jaghatai, but the Khan, I think, is probably quite competent and confident in his ability to take out an Archon and his retinue quite easily. He goes through the Webway Gate, and that's the last scene of him. And so for 10,000 years, we haven't seen Jaghatai Khan. There's been fears that he kind of abandoned the Imperium. But one of the things we kind of get hinted at in this book, The Last Hunt, is there's this character called Jaghatai Khan. It's suggested by actually a Farseer that they work with in the book. It's a long story, that he might be fated to find Jaghatai Khan someday. And so he actually leads his brotherhood into the Webway to go and find their gene father. And that, I believe, is what we are seeing in this artwork here. Jaghatai Khan and his brothers fighting against the Drukhari in the Webway. So in theory, I think the White Scars are pretty close to finding their Primarch, and I think there's a really good chance we'll see them in the future. Could the Khan be trying to get to the Black Legion since Horus hurt the Emperor, and didn't he go after the rival tribe for his adoptive father's death? Maybe it's a very similar way to what we saw with the Lion. So if you're not familiar, before the Lion's kind of like a return within the universe, there were all these reports of like a mythical figure that would like rise from the shadows and save worlds kind of single-handedly or with a small band of warriors. And the idea that Jaghatai Khan's doing something pretty similar could work, because if he's popping in and out of Webway gates, it would absolutely make sense to me. that, yeah, he's kind of saving planets all over the place. I want the Khan back next. With Lion and the G-Man personalities clashing, the Khan could be a great foil to them both, and vice versa. Just really fun narratively to have them all working together and not getting along. He would be a really great alternative to the other two, because Gilliman is running the Imperium. The Lion's kind of got his like newer role about how he's just out to save people, but the Khan is the far more mysterious figure out of the three of them. And you know what? It would be nice to have a non-blonde Primarch back as well, which is another kind of potentially point against Leman Russ there. Sorry, coming back. And I will say, in regards to the Lion, I mentioned this before on a stream, so we never see this in the novels, but in the background lore of Lionel Johnson, it says that his closest brother is actually Jaghatai Khan. I would be fascinated to see those two have a conversation and see like how that actually manifests. I think that's the phrasing that is used, his closest brother. I don't know exactly how that manifests. I don't know whether they're particularly chummy or whether it just means in terms of their temperament, because obviously they're both a bit secretive, a bit enigmatic. But I do think it would be cool to have them kind of maybe have a bit of a relationship there. It could be quite cool. I will say, one of the things about Jaghatai Khan that really interests me, and you find this out in his Primarch novel, so he has this kind of state he can enter called Alak Ger, which is a terminology from Chigoris, but it's this state that he kind of enters when he's moving fast enough, and it's said if he moves fast enough, like anything he like looks at, he can kill. It's like, I think it says his thought alone kills people, so he can move that fast. Now, of course, he wasn't able to kind of use that against Mortarion, but I can't help but think maybe this is based around him kind of being incredibly fast and entering this kind of stage, which he couldn't do against Mortarion when they were fighting on the Lionsgate spaceport. So I actually can't help but wonder if, like, in the right circumstances, maybe Jaghatai is the most powerful Primarch in like in terms of sword fighting, but he just kind of needs a bit of a run up in order to be that powerful. That's what I suspect. Blondest. I'm not sorry. I don't want to be blondest. There's nothing. I have nothing against blondes. I have plenty of blonde friends, but it would be nice not to have like 3 blonde Primarchs. You know, Imperium Secundus Mark II. It would be cool. If you have a look in the Ruin Storm art, they give the Lion like a brown beard, and I think they did that purely because they didn't want to have 3 completely blonde Primarchs. One thing that I think would be really interesting would be the Khan getting some sort of psychic powers, because obviously we're expecting Corvus Corax to come back with some sort of psychic powers. I would love to see like one of Jaghatai or Leman Russ or one of these other Primarchs kind of unlock these other abilities. Obviously the Lion has his forest walking, but something else would be really cool. And so there we have it. That's kind of all the lore, I think, that kind of goes into this idea of Jaghatai Khan being the next Primarch to return. It is hinted that Joghatun Khan is going to be a prophesized White Scar who will find the Khan someday, and he is desperate to, and he, in a lot of ways, that company is trying to regain their honor, which I think is a really cool way to kind of bring the Primarch back. Exactly what he's doing, we're going to have to wait and see. I do think he kind of abandoned the Imperium in one way, but at the same time, I think he would have done that for a good reason. So I'm fascinated to see what they do with the character of Jaghatai Khan. But that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do enjoy this kind of content, do consider joining the channel. I do member streams on a Sunday. The Sunday just gone, I did one on the old ones, and why I actually think we might see them in some way return to Warhammer 40K in the future, which will be pretty epic. And there's a big storyline I think Games Workshop was kind of setting up around that.